Welcome to Sherlock Mondays. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going on a biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. This is episode 28, The Adventure of the Final Problem, and joining me as co-host is Mary Alcaro. Hey, Mary.
Hey Ed, how are you?
Great to see you.
To see you.
Mary, do you know we only have three more shows left starting
It's
tonight?
unbelievable today. It's unbelievable. I know the fact that we're already at the final problem. I can't believe how fast it's gone.
Yeah. And normally this should be the last, like it's the final
The
problem.
final problem.
But no, no, no. There is a return.
Got to give the people what they want.
And we have the manuscript for Empty House. So for the next story. So I've got to go.
Naturally.
Right. Well, everyone, we have three more shows of Sherlock Mondays to deduce, decipher, dissect Arthur Conan Doyle's stories about the world's first consulting detective, Sherlock Holmes, and his able assistant, Dr. John Watson, in a kind of conversational annotation. And if you're watching live right now, I ask you to please like these videos. Also, subscribe to this channel. That helps us considerably. And also, have fun in the live chat because you're live and you can do that. You can talk to each other, and that's a lot of fun. That live chat gets saved, and then people can see it later, and you can see it later as well. If you're watching the recording, I also ask you to please like these videos, subscribe to this channel. Sherlock Mondays is also an audio podcast, so thank you to all of our podcast listeners. And please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach. If you've already donated or joined as a member of the Rosenbach, thank you so much. That's really how I get to do these shows, how I get to smoke and drink and talk about Sherlock Holmes is because of your support of the Rosenbach. And if you have not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so. It's not just us creating these shows, it's running the Rosenbach. We're a nonprofit arts institution. It's caring for our collections. Takes a great deal of effort and also money to do. So I will also tell you all how to register for our special subscription only show, something we're trying out for the very first time on Hound of the Baskervilles at the mid-break. I will also be revealing some news about the Hound of the Baskerville show, as a matter of fact, because we're going to have some more co-hosts join us. So we have our wonderful four co-hosts returning and more. And I'll let you know who those Sherlockians are at the mid-break. But before we start tonight, Mary, what am I drinking?
You are drinking the final problem, which is a spin, as its name may indicate, on the last word cocktail. And I gave everyone the runaround looking for the green chartreuse, which is now in limited availability.
Yes. You had an
As we
ingredient
discovered.
gin, green chartreuse, Saint Germain,
That's
elderflower,
my contribution to the spin.
lime juice, and a little sage. I put a little sage leaf in mine.
Little sage, little thyme. I love a Luxardo cherry in there just to tie it all together. A little bit of sweetness. How is
Out
it?
of Luxardo's. So I have just a regular old maraschino cherry down there. There we
Peasant cherries.
go. But this is delicious. I don't think I've ever even had a last word cocktail, and I looked it up. It was something that came out of Detroit and like the Prohibition or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, it's a very old cocktail. It's a very old cocktail, and makes use of chartreuse, which is lovely. You can substitute for it. What did you say? You use Galliano?
I use Galliano as my substitute, which is another one of those, it's a lot of, it's like a ton of herbals, like 30
Yeah,
herbals, something like that, that they've, uh, brewed together, with,
we don't
whatever,
know what those monks
whatever the
do.
term is.
Yeah, right. I think I would possibly sub in if I were near my bar card. I may sub in Jägermeister, same kind of like syrupy kind of like herbals, but you're going to get a very different spin than the Galliano. I think that's going to be
I would
lighter.
I would think with especially because I'm already using the elderflower,
Yeah,
and I'm
that's
in
true.
Saint Germain, like that's the sweet that I need. The Jaeger, you might get some herbal thing, but you're also getting a
Get some
little sweet
sweetness.
So, but hey,
Yeah,
sweet's good. Sweet tooth people like me.
whatever your palate is, right? These, as always, I say these recipes are a suggestion. You should always feel free to sub in the things that you like and sub out things you don't, or use what you have in case your local monks go on strike or decide that they're going to reduce production. Times is hard, Mr. T. You do what you gotta.
That's it. For people that don't know, what happened is Carthusian monks still make chartreuse. The chartreuse is something that they make. It's not like just like a term like gin. Chartreuse is made by Carthusian monks in France or
Yeah, I
Switzerland.
think they're French.
And they make this, and they decided a few years ago that they're going to cut back. They need to cut back on production of chartreuse to concentrate on other things to help their order.
Like
And
prayer, I don't know.
and
Can't
and
fault the monks.
so
Yeah,
there's less, like, you can't get it in PA anymore apparently at all. And
very
even
hard to get.
if you can get it at other places, so it's really, I think it's becoming an almost European thing that you have to, get it there, and it's very pricey no matter where you get it.
It is. It is. So, if you have a bottle, hold it tight to yourself and become
Well,
like the
drink
first
it,
person on the
but
block. But
cherish it while you drink it.
yes, cherish it while you drink it. Invite your friends over. They'll be so happy.
So, all righty. Well, Mary, since I last saw you, I was actually at the New York Antiquarian book fair, and got to see some wonderful things. I also ran into our co-host Curtis Armstrong, which is fun. And then I didn't get a picture. I'm like, I love getting pictures of Sherlockian co-hosts in the wild.
When you see them in the wild, I saw him in the wild at a Nick Cave concert, but that's another story for another day.
Oh, Um, but one of the cool things I saw there, it was just this weekend, was one of the book dealers, I can't remember who it was, had original photographs, like photographs made at the time that they were taken, of the Cottingley fairies, of the girl
Oh my God.
there. They cost like an astronomical sum,
Of course. Well, because they're real fairies.
Yes, because they were real fairies. And I was very excited. For those who might not know, there was this incident in the UK in 1920, like early 20s, where these little girls had said, we actually met fairies, and they had pictures with them. And there were little fairies, and the girls like in a picture out in the garden, like, oh, look, a fairy with me. And
Right.
and they were like, look, there's fairies in the world. And when you look at the pictures, you're like, that's a cardboard cutout of a drawing. Like, I mean, it's like nobody would mistake that for an actual fairy, that like you
Unless,
that and cut it out and put it there,
yeah,
unless you're who?
unless you're Arthur Conan Doyle and you want to believe.
He completely said, yes, these are actually real, went there, met the girls, went on into the press and talked about how it was authentic, and that, these creatures do exist. And these girls met them because, look, the pictures. Yeah, it's a really unusual moment in Doyle's life. So,
Which is already pretty unusual. I mean, we're very lucky that poor Doyle's not around in the era of deep fakes. I mean, the poor bastard would not stand a chance if he believed those fairy photos.
if you're ready to believe, you'll believe.
You want to believe. Yeah, exactly. But that's so cool that you saw those
Yeah.
photos.
Yeah, I've never seen like, old. I mean, you can look up online everywhere. You
Yeah,
search
yeah, but the actual
fairies, but to see, some prints taken from the time were pretty extraordinary to see.
as
So,
long as there's been photography, pretty much there's been trick photography, right?
and this is like not even a trick. It's just like they literally have
It's
like
so
a
bad.
drawing of a fairy with them. So, and it's not like they're good drawings. It's like, ooh, like that's really well done. And but you can't. I just,
It's
yeah.
the Fae. They show up and they're like, we're not really bad. We're just drawn that way.
This is how we turn up on camera.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. What fun. One of these years I'm gonna make it to that book fair.
Oh, the New York Antiquarian Book Fair is a lot of fun. It's really enjoyable. So a lot of great,
Yes.
great stuff. You walk around, you think like, I, well, you especially as a medieval scholar, you're like, wow, there really are a lot of medieval manuscripts, even just out there in the wild.
There are. There are. And unfortunately there are a bunch of cut leaves out there in the wild.
Oh
So
yeah, that's always existed. Yeah. So
that is always a problem trying to reunite these things because they're, opportunists in the early 19th century, early 20th century that were like, that's nice. I can make a fortune, slice them right out of a manuscript, and you can buy these sort of loose leaves. But yeah, it is amazing what has survived.
yeah. Well, any Sherlockian news, or should we head on with our story today?
I don't know if we have any Sherlockian news. I mean, the Sons of the Copper Beeches will be meeting. That is the Philadelphia Scion Society of the Baker Street Irregulars. Our group has been around for about 75 years, more now.
Yep.
We will be meeting next month. So, if
Do you have an
it's
official title in the Suns, or you like
I am the comptroller of the kennel.
comptroller of the kennel? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So
Yes, that is my official
yeah.
title.
I'm recorder of pedigrees, right?
Recorder of
Right?
pedigrees. Yeah, it's
Recorder
all
of pedigrees.
takes on
Yeah.
on Carlo, the dog.
From the Copper Beaches. Yeah.
Yes, Carlo the Mastiff. So yeah, I mean that's coming up. Those are invitation only because we have so many
Yeah.
enthusiasts, so little space. But hey, you never know. If you're in Philadelphia and you are a Sherlockian, drop us a note in the chat. We'd love to meet you.
Yeah, and I would absolutely make time to meet people in May when it is.
Yeah.
What's the date? May
17th,
May 17th.
Friday.
Um, I would make time to meet people around then. I actually have a Pickwick monthly show to do on Saturday, so I'm not like
Oh,
free for the weekend. Sherlock and then Pickwick that weekend. Um,
very literary weekend.
but and I'm hoping there'll be a Spode dinner the night before where we eat oysters the night before.
I've never been to a Spode dinner. I'm never quick enough to get in on a Spode dinner.
I always have that one. For people that don't know, there's a special Spode dinner at the Baker Street Irregular weekend in January, and it is the Society for the Prevention of Oysters Destroying the Earth.
Yes,
And
yes.
it comes from
Dying Detective.
The Dying Detective when Sherlock is in this like delirium and he starts talking about, oh, these oysters are,
Shall the world be overrun by oysters? Because they're so prolific.
so we do our best to make sure that
Yep.
that doesn't happen. So,
Eat as many oysters
and
as
all you need to
Sherlockian.
do is have a Spode meeting, is be a Sherlockian and meet up with another Sherlockian and eat oysters. So,
And eat some oysters. It's great. It's very popular. This is why I've never gotten in on the early Spode dinner because it's limited space. We always did it in Grand Central Terminal in New
yeah.
York.
But Spode dinners happen everywhere, and
Spode dinners can happen anywhere.
they'll be happening before Copper Beaches this year too. I hope you'll come.
Excellent. Excellent. Looking
All
forward to
right.
it.
And because the Copper Beaches as a scion of the Baker Street Irregulars is because of space, there's only so many people you can have come. I'm hoping perhaps by the end of this year there will be an entirely other new Sherlockian Philadelphia scion that would meet, 6 times a year. And we'll
What an
see
interesting proposal.
if that happens. So that's, something that was supposed to happen already, but then with this show, there's only so much I can do. So, all right.
You are but one man. You're not
Stay,
oysters.
stay tuned, everyone. Well, on with our story. We have shared a PDF of a facsimile of The Adventure of the Final Problem as it was originally published in the December, also the Christmas issue of the Strand magazine in 1893. You can download that on the Rosenbach Sherlock Mondays page. The December Christmas issue was always the biggest seller of the year. So
Yeah.
that's the one that they really wanted to have an impactful story. People did frequently expect ghost stories or some kind of supernatural story in
That's true.
England. That's a Christmas thing. But not the death
Merry
of
Christmas, Sherlock
favorite
Holmes is dead.
not
Yeah,
the
that's
death of
kind of
my
a bummer.
favorite detective.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's what
What'd
they got
you
for
get?
Christmas. Merry,
Murder.
Merry Christmas, kids. Sherlock's dead.
It's
Um,
terrible.
It was also published in America in McClure's magazine. And what had happened is between 1893 and 1902, the magazine published 14 short stories, 2 interviews, and 5 articles written by Arthur Conan Doyle. So McClure's was getting into the Doyle business, not necessarily the Sherlock business. Everybody wanted to be in the Doyle business by this point. I mean, he really was. It wasn't just Sherlock stories. He was selling everything. Everybody wanted to read him. And there were images by Harry C. Edwards in the McClures. And I'll share one of those before we start from this story. And really, they're really good, but I especially like this one because look, he put Sherlock in the deer stalker.
Oh, nice.
This is leaning up on the rock near where they're, the towards the end of this, and it's printed early, like in this, like this is when Sherlock is still just hanging out with. No, this is like at the point of the story, the pages it's on. You see my decrepit Italian friend,
Yeah, my decrepit.
and yet, but like I guess they just had the illustrator Edwards had done a few, and this is where this one wound up. And it's a
pinstripe
great
suit he's wearing.
Pensive. What's
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Is that a pinstripe suit he's got on?
Well, it looks like it's got stripes, but I would imagine it's tweed. So
All right.
I should go with the hat.
I was going to say a little gangster Sherlock Holmes going on there.
I love that he gave him the deer stalker because so it's not just Pat. By this time, people are associating Sherlock with the deer stalker, even though it's really only from Paget illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I don't think. Oh, well, have the plays started already? Gillette and the play, but that's still the plays. That's not really going to influence American magazine illustrators by that point. I wonder. I have often wondered about the iconography that had gone with Sherlock. Oh, but I just Edwards here, Harry C. Edwards, who did this, noted magazine illustrator and historical painter, actually. But one of the things that I love, raised in Philadelphia. There you go. So another Philadelphia connection. Through my entire life and all the work that I do, no matter what it is, for everything, anytime there's a Philadelphia connection, you will be certain I will point it out.
We appreciate your service.
But I do remember, well, Philadelphians do. I'm always that the iconography of Sherlock with the deer stalker and especially the big pipe. I'm always trying to find, like, we can find early illustrations of the deer stalker. There's early illustrations for the Sign of Four that actually have it in a newspaper, and it doesn't seem connected to the rest of the story. So, but when does it become specifically associated with Sherlock? And everybody's answer is usually when William Gillette, the actor, took over and started playing him on stage, and I can believe that. But the big calabash pipe. Gillette doesn't use a big calabash pipe. He uses a curved pipe, but it's not like those old calabashes that you see. So I'm still researching and trying to find out where that's from. Maybe some Sherlockian completely knows. Maybe dozens of Sherlockians absolutely know, and they will tell me one day, but no one has told me
in the chat, probably.
Yeah. So
my book club edition has the front piece, the Sidney Paget, that talk about spoilers. I mean, right there.
And that's the way it's published. It is right at the start of the story. And what does it say at the bottom there?
The death of Sherlock Holmes.
Like, no, this is the way the first Strand readers are seeing it.
Horrifying.
Sherlock is dying in this story. Before they even get to it's facing the page that they're reading. Like, this is the image that you see.
We're definitely in the era of before tag your spoilers.
Yeah. And it is Doyle. Well, this is what we thought. Doyle means this for me, the final story, right? So now I can finally concentrate on my historical fiction and
all he wants
and novels. The audience, though, for Sherlock in the Strand was absolutely enormous. And that's why they keep paying him more and more for each batch of Sherlock stories. And Doyle finally figures, well, the only way I'm going to stop writing him is if I kill him. And
right.
So the first sentence is
yes. Is the inspiration for the why I called the drink. Well, it's why the drink is the final problem and why it's drawn from the last word, because the story starts with Watson's very dramatic. It is with a heavy heart that I take up my pen to write these last words in which I shall ever record the singular gifts by which my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, was distinguished.
mhm.
Brutal. Brutal.
um that I mean the heavy heart. You can imagine reading this for the first time and you're like, what?
What? Yeah.
His story and what are you hinting at here? You mean is he actually dead?
Yeah.
Um
Right.
and the word had actually been leaked in the press as early as September
Mm,
30th. And the Pall Mall Gazette
okay.
had a piece, and let me share that. In the Pall Mall Gazette, they have this article. Here it is. I'll make it bigger. This is the literary notes. So at the bottom of this column here. There we go.
In a
The
position to
bottom here.
announce, yeah.
Yeah, we are in a position to announce the approaching decease of Mr. Sherlock Holmes and are not by any means sorry to do so.
Oh,
Dr. Conan Doyle does not intend to write any more detective stories, and we are glad to hear it. He can do far better work.
oh,
Now, that almost sounds like a Doyle plant to me. That Doyle they've like he has contacted somebody in the Palm Gazette and literally said that to them.
yeah.
But that's as
I
early
could,
as September 30th. And then there were several newspapers and magazines in October and November that had mentioned that Sherlock Holmes is going to die. That's going to be the next thing. Wasn't a secret, but that doesn't mean everyone knew. And I'm sure there were
no, and it doesn't mean
plenty.
that rumors are true, right?
Yeah. And I'm sure there were plenty of Strand readers who were shocked when they first saw that story opening with that picture.
Sure.
So, yeah, that was, and I mean, he intended, well, Watson, well, not, but Watson then says, I'd intended Naval Treaty to be the last story I was going to write. So he's kind of even, doubling down on Watson. Your narrators are literally telling people that, like, this is the last story I was going to tell.
Right, right.
And then he says, 2 years has not filled the
Mm,
void in his life, meaning that he's been waiting 2 years to tell this story.
yeah,
That if this
yeah.
is
And that we know
1893,
for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
Holmes died in 1891, and he's been writing stories all along, knowing that Sherlock died and didn't tell us.
Yeah, that is, and that's an amazing. This is a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, and Sherlockian, Nick Martorelli, always says this about when you read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and when you read the memoirs, you have to think about the fact that all of these are being written from the point of view of a Watson who is already writing in memoriam of his friend, and that everything that he says about Holmes is coming from a place of writing about his dead friend. And if you read it with that sort of mindset, those scenes of admiration, those scenes of Watson being like totally like wonderstruck by Holmes's deductions, they come off a little sadder and sweeter and maybe a little more sincere because of them being in retrospect.
Yeah,
But it's an interesting way to sort of back form the way that you look at the stories.
yeah. Um, you're also a little your video your audio's coming through great. Your video's choppy. Why don't you stop your audio
Sorry.
and start? That's okay. Stop the audio and restart it. That might end the choppy, and it might just happen when we're deal with it. But we can totally hear you and we can see you. It's just the video's doing that little choppy
It's
thing.
just a little weird. Is it any better?
Did you stop it and stop your video and then
I
start?
did.
And it
Let me
didn't
stop
even
the
register.
video.
There you go.
Man.
Now restart
All
it.
right, let's see what happens.
There you go.
How are we doing? All right.
Yeah,
Let me
there's a
know if I
little
get
lag.
choppy.
There's a little lag, I think.
Ah,
Um,
this
the
is something that our podcast friends don't have to worry about.
Yes, they don't have to worry about this at all. We can edit this out of that. We won't edit it out. I just send it out.
We won't.
Right. Well, uh so it even confirms that this is 1891. A little later, he gives it was the early spring of 1891. But one of the reasons he has to tell us this story now, finally, after 2 years of sitting on it, is that because my hand has been forced by recent letters in which Colonel James Moriarty defends the memory of his brother, and I have no choice but to lay the facts before the public exactly as they occurred. I alone know the absolute truth of the matter, and I am satisfied that the time has come when no good purpose is to be served by its suppression. So only Watson knows the truth. And as we read the story, only Watson knows the truth. You're right. Like
Yeah, only Watson can.
No one else could possibly know what happened.
Nope, nope, because he is the closest thing we have to an eyewitness, although not an eyewitness.
Not a complete eyewitness. So,
which turns out to be a great loophole for later,
yeah.
but that's for next week. I love this whenever Doyle doesn't feel like looking up a name or remembering a name, he just fills in James. Because this is a trifle that has been exploited to many humorous ends in Sherlockiana, that Professor James Moriarty has a brother who is Colonel James Moriarty.
Yeah. Isn't there? And there's a third.
They're all just James.
And then
there's a third. Right. They're all just James.
Yeah. Who winds up being named like
kind of like, right? Like Watson when his wife greets him as James.
Yes. So yeah, James is his go-to name.
James is go-to. When in doubt. He's like, not John, but James. No, it's great. This is Watson's hand has been forced by the possibility of libelous material appearing, and he's got to clear his friend's name.
Yeah, and this is, the uh uh that but just to go forward, that it's he is. I just love the line here. It lies with me to tell for the first time what really took place between Professor Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes. And it is so it's like this duty. Like if I'm writing these memoirs, and if really the point of his memoirs are not about the point of being his memoirs, but about Sherlock Holmes, then it is his duty to give us the end of his life. And he ties it. It's after his marriage and his start in practice, and then Watson. Well, I mean, Doyle tries to play the chronologist here. During the winter of the year, early spring of 1891. The dates wind up being kind of impossible with the way Doyle has already written the stories. Watson says there were only three cases in 1890, which he can retain any record, and everything winds up getting so compressed because Doyle has come up with this conceit that he meets Sherlock for only a couple of ventures, and then he gets married a few months later, and then so everything has to get compressed in here. So it doesn't, it never kind of, well, it works if you're a chronologist. You just have to
You're a chronologist.
You just have to do all kinds of things to make it work. So that only
there's a lot of mental gymnastics and not being fun at parties to make it happen. But people have made it happen.
Yes, they have.
Chronology is very important. It's just not my bugbear. I have other trifles, but we all have our own trifles in Sherlockiana. Isn't that wonderful?
Well, Sherlock has been engaged. Go ahead. You were going to say?
No, that's all right. It's that lag on top of my being from New Jersey and being a chronic interrupter. I'll do my best to take a breath. Yeah, he tries to soften the blow of why I guess not soften the blow, but tries to give us, the reader, some understanding of why he doesn't have a sense of why all of a sudden things have gotten so dicey for his friend Holmes, right? That he's like, well, we hadn't seen each other very much. We had been like really close, and then I got married, and then I only saw him a little. He says the very intimate relations which had existed between Holmes and myself became to some extent modified. And so this kind of justifies the not having seen or heard from Holmes in a bit, knowing that he's been off on the continent doing some cases. He'd been engaged by the French government, and expected that Holmes would be in France for a considerable time, which is why he's so surprised when suddenly his friend appears.
Yeah. And he shows up pale and thin and afraid of air guns.
Yeah.
Um,
Afraid of air guns. Yeah, yeah. As you do. Comes
would you
in,
mind closing your
wants to
shutter?
shut the
Yeah.
shutter. Yeah, closing the shutters. I do love that too. And the answering Watson's look, in that very a Holmesian deduction, right? Watson takes one look at him and says to us in the narration, he looked paler and thinner than usual. Doesn't say this out loud, but Holmes responds as though he has said it aloud, right?
Oh.
Yes, I have been using myself up rather too freely. Answering the look and then immediately closing the shutters. And I do love that exchange. You're afraid of something? Well, I am. Of what? Of air guns.
That's it. I hadn't caught the beginning of that. That he did. He like Watson doesn't say that out loud. That Holmes is,
Oh, he doesn't.
and that Holmes immediately answers it as if he had said it out loud.
It's sweet, right? You sort of, it's the powers of deduction, yes, of course, but it's also like you have this with your oldest friends that you can tell by the way that they look at you that they're thinking something. And you're like, yeah, yeah, I know, I know, I know.
Well, he emphasizes that it's stupidity rather than courage to refuse to recognize danger when it's close upon you. That's
Yes.
that's smart. I mean, and Holmes is never the one to like just, and there's a reason behind everything. Of course I'm afraid because somebody's going to shoot me. And then we find out other things have happened too. So, but he's
Right,
reasoned it out,
right.
and that's the reason for his behavior. So
An incredible appearance, this showing
your
up pale and thin
Mary, your video has
and being,
completely frozen. And I wonder if
oh, I'm so
you,
sorry.
I think you
Let me
might have to
try
go out
something
and
else.
come back, and then we'll see if that
Oof,
cures it.
brief intermission. We'll do that. Let's see what happens. All right, I'll even come back.
Good. Leave and come back. And while you're doing that, I will talk about how Holmes then drew in the smoke of his cigarette as if the soothing influence was grateful to him. You don't get a lot of talk about cigarettes being soothing and anymore. And we associate Sherlock so much with the pipe, and we kind of believe that about him, that that's what it is. But and I love to smoke the pipe on the show and do that. And but God forbid I ever tried to smoke a cigarette. Like Sherlock does. So, all righty. Are you back now, Mary?
I think I'm back. I don't see you, but do you see me?
I do not see you. We have no video. We just have audio. So,
Uh-oh. Let me see what happens if
figuring that
I
out.
try something.
Well, also Watson notices that two of the knuckles of Sherlock were burst and bleeding. So he has been apparently in some kind of scrap. This isn't just Sherlock knocking on the door, as he's done for a couple stories, and said, "Oh, Watson, how are you?" And, "Oh, maybe you'll come on this adventure with me." Sherlock has already been on an adventure, and now his coming to Watson in the middle of an adventure, which isn't usually what happens. Is Mrs. Watson in? She's away on a visit, and then Holmes right away is, "Let come away with me for a week to the continent." So Watson immediately agrees, of course, because it's Watson and it's Sherlock, and Watson never wants to miss out on any kind of, Sherlockian adventure. This is what he has signed up for, and which he is absolutely not going to, not do, is come on a Sherlockian adventure. The Let's see what we have here. And then gets right into talking about Professor Moriarty. You have probably never heard of Professor Moriarty. Never. There's the genius and wonder of the thing. The man pervades London and no one has heard of him. That's what puts him on a pinnacle in the records of crime. I tell you, Watson, in all seriousness, that if I could beat that man, if I could free society of him, I should feel that my own career had reached its summit and I should be prepared to turn to some more placid line in life. Now, we'll go on and I mean, some of the text in this story is so key and so important for Sherlock, and then but also for what he's creating here in this grand nemesis that everyone associates with Sherlock Holmes. Are you back, Mary? Perhaps not yet. That Sherlock is, sorry for the technical difficulties. So frequently our Sherlockian co-hosts are on the road moving around and need to find a secure place to do the shows from. We thought we had a secure place. So I apologize for the technical difficulties of the show, because it's also much more fun when I'm talking with someone and not just talking alone. But the idea of Moriarty that people have is that, oh, well, he was the great, foe of Sherlock Holmes, and how many, stories that they fight together. Well, this is kind of the only one. He'll get some mentions in later stories, but the way Doyle has written this is just by these few words, as he's given this Moriarty this great, rich history of conflict with Sherlock, and he's behind so many different crimes, the pinnacle in the records of crime, that Doyle has managed to create this idea of Moriarty that's greater than just him being a part of this story. Wouldn't you say so, Mary?
I agree to whatever you've just said.
I apologize.
I've done a little
technical difficulties. It's
did
what
a
we
little
get.
Wi-Fi witchcraft. We'll see what happens. We'll see if this is better.
But Moriarty, the point is that Doyle has created this grand villain nemesis that this is it.
We've never seen. Yeah,
we've never seen it. And this is really the only story that he's a character in, even though it'll get mentioned later. But he's done such a great job with the way he's worded this, and the way he's put this together, that it seems as if Moriarty's always been there.
Mm-hmm. It's a great backwriting of a villain.
Yeah.
All these minor things were actually this one big thing.
Yeah. Sherlock also mentions that he's rich now. The assistants to the royal family of Scandinavia to the French Republic have left me in a position that I can do whatever I want.
Casually. Can focus on his chemical experiments. Must be nice.
But this is all he wants to do now. He has to finish his career with defeating Moriarty. And he says them, then he describes him. He's of good birth, excellent condition. He's this great mathematical genius. He wrote a famous treatise upon the binomial theorem, which you can look up. It's a real thing, this binomial.
It is. Little Pirates of Penzance tie-in too.
Astrophysics. Oh, is it? I don't know that. Yeah,
I love the Pirates of Penzance. So good. It's just one of the things that the modern Major General works into his song. And I always think about
there you go,
the binomial theorem.
I didn't know that. And so is that after this? So are they using this for that?
Must be, because is it Lerner and Lowe? Who does Pirates of Penzance? Yeah, it's definitely after.
It's Gilbert Sullivan. Yeah.
Gilbert and Sullivan. Yeah. So it's after this.
Well, what's
I'm
interesting
sure.
too is that
But
Doyle later buys Gilbert's crime library and has his criminological library that he buys actually from Gilbert, who was collecting
huh,
crime books. There you go. No.
wow.
This is interesting that he talks about, he says, Moriarty, the man had hereditary tendencies of the
Yeah.
most diabolical kind. A criminal strain ran in his blood, which instead of being modified was increased and rendered infinitely more dangerous by his extraordinary mental powers. That he's a criminal because of genetics, because it was
Yeah.
in him already.
It's that bit of that awkward pre-eugenics kind of Victorian pseudoscience physiognomy that the character can be read in the face and in the brow and in the head. And also that you inherit these
Mhm.
things in the way that madness can be inherited, or genius in the case of the Holmes brothers. Um, you can also have sort of criminality and loose morals inherited,
Which we just had in the naval treaty with
right?
Holmes talking about to Watson that, like, well, of course, I have art in my blood, and that his grandmother, married
Yeah,
the French artist. So
yeah.
the art in his blood has manifested it itself in his, brilliant way of observing and little details and doing that stuff. So Holmes is very much on board with this. Yeah, you inherit these kind of things, but you also inherit a kind of morality. You also inherit the desire to be evil, in a sense, which
It's
was
so,
a huge problem of all these criminological,
yes,
theorists,
yes.
and then eugenics after that.
Yes, yes, and it's interesting to think about what forces are considered to be relevant. And I've written on this in sort of a more academic strain, but how morality can also be tempered by climate, the country that you're in, the people that you're around. This is part of the concern of what Kipling would call the white man's burden, is going into these colonies that Britain keeps and trying to go on their sort of civilizing mission. And that if you spend too much time in the colonies, you can sort of go native, is the fear, right? That you'll lose your sort of British moral upright sensibilities and become in some ways, quote unquote, savage. And
Yeah.
I've written on how we see this with soldiers who return from India, or so criminals who have come back from found their way back from doing time in penal colonies
Yeah.
in Australia. That morality is so, it could be in the blood, but it can also be sort of in the air, in the climate around you. And of course, the fear of what gin was doing just on the streets of London itself, and what would happen if you had these women that were in the workforce and then taking the drink, and what would it do to their children? And so many things can go wrong,
Yeah.
um, and sort of infect you with this strain of criminality, or it can reveal itself to be inherent in you all along.
Hmm. Well, Moriarty's had it in him all along, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that is, the way, Sherlock, sees it. That he is, it's a matter of birth, just as it's a matter of his birth. And then he says, he's talking about how he's continually been, this is more, build up from Doyle. Like,
Yeah.
like, I've always been aware that there's some power behind what's going on. Now we get Sherlock as the conspiracist, in a sense, but of
Oh
course
yeah.
he's right in this story that there has been a power, and he's trying to break through the veil which shrouded it, and all that language. So kind of, also, works through, people constantly say, like, how could Doyle believe in the Cottingley fairies, right? How could he go
Mhm.
on this whole spiritual thing when he was such a reasonable logician with Sherlock Holmes? It doesn't, there's no difference there. In the way Sherlock approaches the world and the way Doyle approaches the world, it is, you observe and you try to find the logic. Sometimes you wind up bringing your own, feelings and desires of what to be there to bear in it. But of course, it's fiction and fact for Doyle.
Yes.
And but really, for Sherlock to say, I've endeavored to break through the veil which shrouded it, and seized my thread and followed it, and that's the same thing Doyle is doing his entire life.
Yeah.
His spiritual search and trying to find meaning in the world. Um, and then we have the perfect line here. He is the Napoleon of crime, Watson. He is the organizer of half that is evil and nearly all that is undetected in this great city. He is a genius, a philosopher, an abstract thinker. He has the brain of the first order. He sits motionless like a spider in the center of its web, but that web has 1,000 radiations, and he knows well every quiver of each of them. Sherlock's also describing himself. And
A
that's
little bit.
powerful, isn't he? Like, if you
Yeah.
just take out that he's evil, Sherlock even describes himself as at one point as the web, and he's the center of the web. Watson describes Holmes as the center of this web, and doing things.
Yeah, I mean, irregulars sort of go out through the city and
Yeah.
they're his little agents that can't be traced back to him. But he does sit at the center and have information find its way back to him, whether it's things that he's posted in the agony columns, pulling in criminals to come to Baker Street, bringing the police force there, bringing the irregulars as the sort of unofficial force there. Yeah, absolutely. It's so much of Moriarty is the mirror.
Sherlock at one, I am weaving my web around. Oh no, that's somebody else. Holmes says we have our web to weave. Theirs is already woven. When I have spun the web, they may take the flies, but not before.
Right, right. I may take the flies, but not before. Right, right, right.
I mean, this is and now Holmes is describing somebody else's, but of course he's evil.
Right.
And so what we get is the perfect that what has become now the whole, superhero supervillain battle in
Yes.
which they are essentially the same, except one is good and one is bad.
Yeah, and he'll go on to say that. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but he'll go on to say that, right? I had at last met an antagonist who was my intellectual
Yeah.
equal, right? My horror of his crime at his crimes was lost in my admiration of his skill. Yeah, that these are two halves of the same whole, and the text has been telling us, I'm not sure if you mentioned this while I was away, but this sort of constant foreshadowing in the text of Holmes sort of being aware of and accepting his own death, of if I could only do this, if I can only do this thing, if I can only rid the world of Moriarty, my whole career will have been worth it. Like it will have been enough for me to do this thing. That Holmes has met his match in this person of Moriarty, and that's how he's going to justify his entire career, and what he has to offer. My one little side thought about the bottom of this paragraph, go on if you were going to say something
No,
related.
go ahead.
Totally unrelated. This is where T.S. Eliot pulls for McCavity when he writes Possum's Book of Practical Cats. McCavity, the mystery cat, who whenever there's a crime, McCavity's not there, right? Like, and some of this language is pulled directly from these paragraphs right here. And I just love.
That's the second thing that Eliot took from
Yeah.
his first was the Musgrave Ritual that he adapts into his play into Murder in the Cathedral, and then this McCavity
In the Book of Practical Cats. I love T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is forever pulling things that I love. Working on Julian of Norwich right now, and he pulls from her as well.
But of course, then you say that people are like, T.S. Eliot, do you mean Cats?
Yeah.
Lloyd Webber Cats, which is based on T.S.
Which is
Eliot.
based on Possum's Book of Practical Cats. Yes, yes, of course.
Book of Practical Cats. Yeah,
that's right. I have to connect all the dots.
That's the connection.
Yeah, that's what.
See, you and I, you're like, we're in this literary world. I'll be like T.S. Eliot, but the real world, the rest of the world, the 90%
the rest of normal people are like, but cats.
You mean cats, right?
Yeah. Oh my God! Yeah, of course.
Who's this T.S. Eliot chap?
What? Yes, to the extent that cats can be said to have a plot. It's inspired, vignettes inspired by Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, but is serves as the basis for Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Someone in the
Yeah.
chat mentions that T.S. Eliot was Rudy. Hey, Rudy. Mentions
Hey,
that
Rudy.
T.S. Eliot was a member of the Hound of Baskerville, sick, and corresponded with Vincent Starrett, which is absolutely true. And also, T.S. Eliot worked at Faber and Faber with Frank Morley, the brother of Christopher Morley, who founded the Baker Street Irregulars. So Frank Morley especially knew T.S. Eliot very well, as they were both editors at that publisher in England.
It's amazing how all these things come together, isn't it?
Everything connects. So
it's all connected
in a web that we
in a
can
web.
call the gradations. So the there's also, and I'll just mention this briefly because there's wonderful research you can do to find out how Doyle has put together this character of Moriarty, and he was definitely inspired by a real life criminal by the name of Adam Worth, Worth, Adam Worth. In Vincent Starrett's private life of Sherlock Holmes, he has a quote that it says, "The original of Moriarty was Adam Worth, who stole the famous Gainsborough in 1876 and hid it for a quarter of a century. This was revealed by Sir Arthur in conversation with Dr. Gray Chandler Briggs some years ago." I actually don't have that actual reference. Like, I don't know where that is that Starrett said that, but it is not unusual. Other people have come up with this too. There's a great book about Adam Worth called Adam Worth and Napoleon of Crime, written by Ben McIntyre some years ago. Worth was just one of those criminal geniuses who stole lots of things and got away with a lot of it and made a lot of money, including stealing the painting by Gainsborough, the Duchess of Devonshire, and just holding it for himself because he liked it so much. And he was this, lived in England for a long time after coming from America, and it is there are certain parallels between Worth and Moriarty, and especially with the Napoleon of crime that Holmes calls him, that kind of line up with Adam Worth. Well,
any physical parallels in appearance? Because of course we get that like sinister.
There's not. Worth is like a little guy with gray hair and a big old mustache. Like, he looks like just any old guy
Love
from
it.
the 19th century. He doesn't look like Moriarty at all. So, because Doyle's not going to do that. Doyle is going to have his characters match the kind of physiognomical, whatever, of physiognomical
I was just ignoring that. Yeah,
that's
I
tough.
ignore
That's
that.
a tough one to turn into an adverb, or adjective. But those characteristics that will reveal how he's actually brilliant and evil,
right?
And also looks like Sherlock.
Yeah. Do we want to go to? Am I rushing ahead, or we go to
no?
that description?
We're right there. I mean, he's Holmes' equal. Holmes admires him. Holmes lets Watson know, but it doesn't matter. He's going to be arrested in 3 days. I've just got to make it through these 3 days.
Just gotta get to Monday, I've said a million times.
The longest weekend ever. And then he tells Watson about, he paid me a visit.
And we get to see the man. His appearance was quite familiar to me. I wonder how, because hasn't he been in the web?
Because he's never met him.
Right.
This is the first meeting.
Yeah. But somehow familiar, right? He is extremely tall and thin. His forehead domes out in a white curve, and his 2 eyes are deeply sunken in his head. He is clean shaven, pale, and ascetic looking, retaining something of the professor in his features. His shoulders are rounded from much study, rude, and his face protrudes forward and is forever slowly oscillating from side to side in a curiously ripped.
Now, the only thing that kind of the thing that matches with Holmes, as Mary might be frozen again, the thing that matches with Holmes is the thin, ascetic looking kind of person. Now, Holmes's forehead doesn't kind of, dome out like that, like Moriarty's does, but it is, but which is a sign of his intelligence. And the kind of eyes deeply sunken that kind of doesn't quite match Holmes, and especially the curious reptilian fashion, a way of his head kind of oscillates. This is winds up being the kind of difference between Holmes and Moriarty, that Moriarty, because of his evilness, winds up looking more reptilian than Holmes. Right, Mary? He looks more reptilian than
Holmes
Holmes.
is a bird, right?
Yes. Yeah, Holmes is the bird, hawk-like. Um, uh,
Hawk-like.
and Moriarty's reptilian. Although we know from, dinosaur studies here, birds, we're all, we're all related anyway. So
All
um
connected.
the let's share the picture of Moriarty that Paget has drawn of them meeting together. When we started this show, you held up your book to show the death of Sherlock
Yes.
Holmes, but I don't think I actually showed it.
Yeah.
Which is that this is the picture that people see as they're starting the story. It's Holmes and
Right.
Moriarty, and it says the death of Sherlock Holmes, the falls, like the hat just caught there in midair. It's just absolutely wonderful to give the impression that that's the way they're going to go too.
Right.
But when Moriarty pays Holmes his visit, here he is. The Professor Moriarty stood before me. And exactly, like Paget must have just
Yeah.
literally taken the words that Doyle had written, and which he doesn't always do, and just put this together. I don't know if Paget had a model in mind, as he did with Sherlock and as he did with other characters sometimes, that he had people in mind when he was drawing these. But here's his Moriarty. And, if you just isolated the face, I mean, if you put a deer stalker on him, you wouldn't see that. It would be like Sherlock after a long night kind of thing, with the
Yeah.
eyes
Yeah. Rough,
darker.
rough night.
So it's just not that far. You could imagine this character showing up to Watson, and then it turns out it's Sherlock in disguise, and he pulls off the bald wig.
Definitely.
That it was Sherlock in disguise as this guy. He wouldn't have to do that much to change into him here. Well, he also sounds like Holmes when he speaks, with the way like which what he says right away to Holmes: you have less frontal development than I would should have expected. Like, this is something Holmes would say to somebody. um
Greet someone. Like,
and then it is a dangerous habit to finger loaded firearms in the pocket of one's dressing gown. And
yeah.
yeah, Holmes has the gun in his dressing gown that he admits to here. I drew the weapon out, laid it upon the table, laid it out, cocked it, like in case I need to grab it and quick shoot him. Um, and he says something about his eyes, which made me feel very glad that I had it there. So, Holmes wants to remind, Doyle wants to remind us too, that this is a dangerous guy. It's not just some old professor looking at you. Like, he could murder you in a heartbeat and he'd be fine with that.
Good. Yeah.
And
Cold-blooded. Reptilian.
and then their exchange is, all that I have to say has already crossed your mind. Then possibly my answer has crossed yours. You stand fast. Like, they don't even have to have a conversation because they both know
Great.
exactly what the other one is thinking about them.
It's purely for our benefit that they even say as much as they do. You can
Yeah.
imagine this exchange going down by them just looking, staring each other down, right? They're each several chess moves ahead of
Yeah.
us mere mortals. And so Holmes has to supply the dialogue for the rest of us.
If they played chess, it would be like, let's just skip to the end game, and they would both just like sweep the board and then put the last few pieces on, because we know this is where we're going to end up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but you need more than that for a story.
You do. You do. You need to give the people a little something, a little action to work with.
In real life, because they know what each other's thinking, Moriarty would just come in and say, so you're not going to stop? No. Okay. So that's,
I'll see you in
entire,
hell, and that's sort of it.
the entire exchange. But,
Yeah.
they do go through it a bit. And I think and Moriarty also does the thing that Holmes does, and he's kind of funny in a sense, in the way he
Yeah.
describes it. You crossed my path
Yes.
on this day. You incommoded me. You seriously inconvenienced me. You absolutely hampered me. And, this kind of, understatement, that he's
Oh
used
yeah.
is
Tremendous understatement.
humorous. Um, and But Holmes gives the great line, like, it's trouble, right? And Holmes says, danger is part of my trade. Like he's James
Yep.
Bond all of a sudden.
This is Sherlock Holmes as James Bond. This is as close
Yeah,
as we sort of get to Sherlock
yeah,
Holmes action hero, right? Danger's
yeah,
part of my trade. This is you can see noir crime novels being like
yeah.
born out of this. Like, oh, that's a good one. That's a great idea. This feels more Raymond Chandler than Conan
It
Doyle.
does. It does. But it also becomes more Bond-like for me in that now Moriarty becomes the kind of supervillain, that uber
Yeah.
villain that fights. Because then he's like, oh, and then he gets angry. And then we finally
Yes.
see the difference between the two of them because Holmes would never get angry at this moment. Like I'm going to destroy you. You know that. Um and Holmes says, well, then, that's great. Okay. I'm going to take you down in the process. And
Yeah.
then, Moriarty says again, I can promise you the one, but not the other. He snarled and then turns around and, turns his back on him and leaves the room. Like Holmes gets the best of him
Hmm.
emotionally, that like
Yeah.
Moriarty can't stand that someone has gotten the best of him. And that winds up, and that always winds up being the difference between the heroes and the villains.
Right.
The villains are like finally, you know,
Yeah.
angry
And
and
we've got to be able to see that. We have to see that. We also have to see that glimmer because otherwise it's just this old brilliant professor shows up. We have to see the sort of meanness of spirit,
yeah,
and the way that he can turn
yeah.
from a very civilized encounter, to then be this sort of snarling villain.
And Holmes is unfazed by this. This just doesn't, you know, bother him at all. Um,
Right.
Before I go on, everyone, let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to thousands of fellow Sherlockians worldwide. We've done 28 now. It'll be 30 free episodes of Sherlock Mondays and another 100 and more or so, 125, 130 more of other biblioventures. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and Sherlock Mondays by donation, which you can do so at our website or by becoming a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events, also early access to programs. We have lots of online things you can, engage in as well if you don't live in the area as a member, as we have many members all over the world now. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. There are lots of great in-person and online programs now, but including our Hound of the Baskervilles show coming up. But also, I wanted to give a little preview for next week for Sherlock Mondays, in which we'll be talking about the empty house, the adventure of the empty house. I know we're talking about the death of Sherlock Holmes this week. How could there possibly be more?
And
Read,
yet,
read The Empty House, and you will find out why. The Rosenbach has in our collections the manuscript, the complete manuscript for The Empty House, written by Doyle. And on the show next week, we'll not only have Monica Schmidt as co-host, we'll also have Steve Rothman who is a great Sherlockian, was the editor of the Baker Street Journal for over 20 years. And he also, with a couple other people, edited the facsimile edition of the manuscript of The Empty House for the Baker Street Press. So Steve Rothman will join us next week. Also, on the next episode of Sherlock Mondays, the penultimate episode, we will announce the next biblioventure that will begin in the fall of 2024. So you don't want to miss that announcement. You don't want to miss that opportunity to register first for biblioventure fall 2024. What book or books are from the Rosenbach's collection will we read for our next biblioventure? You can certainly guess in the chat and guess next week in the chat before I make the announcement at the mid-break. All of these shows, all these biblioventures, what we try to do is focus on a really great work from our collection that we know people would be really interested in. And we have more to come in the fall. So I hope you'll tune in next week to find out on the next episode to find out what the fall 2024 biblioventure will be. And that will be completely free. But in between, after we finish with Sherlock Mondays, we are going to have a special Sherlockian biblioventure as an exclusive pay-only series on Hound of the Baskervilles for 8 episodes. It will be available to only those who pay for it. Paid subscribers is $80 for the general public. It's $50 if you're a member, which is a great deal for 8 episodes. That's a really great deal. It'll run on the Mondays in May and June at the same time. The same kind of format, a co-host and myself going through this, and as Hound of the Baskervilles was originally published serially, it'll work well for the format that we're going to do it in. And our 4 great co-hosts are going to return: Mary Alcaro, Annika Schmidt, Anastasia Klimchinskaya, and Curtis Armstrong. But there's going to be more. We are going to have 4 more co-hosts. So it'll be 1 co-host. Well, actually, one will be 2. For every episode, we'll have somebody, 4 of those episodes will have someone new, and our 4 returning co-hosts will be there as well. The 5 new co-hosts will be Scott Monty from I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, Steve Doyle from who is the publisher of the Baker Street Journal, and also at Wessex Press, right? Steve Doyle is a great Sherlockian and produces a video podcast called The Fortnightly Dispatch on YouTube for the Baker Street Irregulars, in which he interviews great Sherlockians. So Scott Monty, Steve Doyle, Max McGee, who is an enormous amount of fun and a great Sherlockian, and somebody I've been spending a lot of time with from talking about Sherlock with. Max McGee will join us. And then the final one will be the co-hosts of Doings of Doyle podcast, both Mark Jones and Paul Chapman, and they would be on one episode together themselves. The Doings of Doyle podcast is a really fabulous audio podcast on Conan Doyle stories. So our regular 4 co-hosts, and then those 5 others will be joining us for all 8 episodes. It will be the biblioventure, the Sherlockian biblioventure of a lifetime. I hope you will all join me on that. It'll be a lot of fun. So they are the new code. That's my news to break for this week. Next week, there'll be more news to break. The last show, there will be news to break too on our wrap-up show. So there's always news to break on Sherlock.
Always something.
On Sherlock Mondays. So, well, let's get back to this story because we're still just Holmes filling in Watson and what's going on. We're going late tonight, Mary. So
yeah, it's all right.
Connection abilities, your connection abilities or disabilities notwithstanding, we're still going late.
Yeah, no, it's
right. Holmes now tells
They're
Watson.
trying to kill Holmes.
that they're trying to kill him. He was almost run over by a carriage, a two-horse van, and he jumps out of the way. A brick comes down off a building, and then basically just, some guy just comes out and attacks him. Like they can't kill him the other
He
way.
just clocks him.
Yep. He just, I knocked him down and the police have him in custody. So, uh, the gentleman upon whose front teeth I have barked with my knuckles.
Okay.
Yeah, so Holmes is like fighting it out. That's why his knuckles have been bloody when he showed up here.
Yeah.
He
He's
is
had a day, you know?
he is fighting it out. He
He is fighting it out.
uh And now he says, so I've got to get away for a few days till this whole thing comes together and all the arrests are made. And, because apparently Holmes is also key to this. So it's not just like they're all going to be arrested. It seems like he has to survive to make this work, because of
Yeah.
whatever
He's
evidence.
got some key information or something that is going to tie up all the loose ends that only Holmes can do.
Yeah.
So he's just got to make it to Monday.
I also then like next what happens is he calls them a syndicate of criminals.
Yeah.
That and just this word syndicate being used, in the past, organized before this late 19th century, kind of before mid 19th century, the organized crime tended to be set up along what maybe you could call military models, like it's this
Hmm.
band of criminals who acted for someone. It's like pirates or gangs. That's actually kind of a military model in a sense. There's a leader, there's the troops, they do these things for themselves and for for the greater troop or whatever. But in the 19th century, what happens is, and there you can find examples of this probably throughout the world in history, but it's especially here in Europe and America, you can really see, you start to see more organization on
Hmm.
not these kind of military models, but on business models, and in which we're kind of running a business, an organization, a syndicate. And those words start to be used. Organized crime, just the phrase of that comes about in the late 19th century. And it's not like the criminal gangs in the past weren't organized in some ways, but it becomes more almost corporate in a sense
Yeah.
at this time. So then you can, call it, a syndicate of criminals. And this is a new thing that happened in the 19th century, and that, Doyle doesn't invent this. Clearly, it's something that he has observed already, and other people have observed. Um, but the fact that it's more business-like means it's more involved in, like, it's about profit, and it's about
Mhm.
it's less evil than it is we need to do what we can do to get the most we can out of something. Um, and so
Optimizing your business, growing your
yeah,
small business. Your small business is crime in this case.
in this case, it's crime, and all kinds of crime for Moriarty and
Yeah.
Syndicate. So they'll do anything.
That he's tied to all these different kinds of crime. I always find interesting about Moriarty that it's not just one sort of thing. It's not Milverton the blackmailer where his one thing is blackmail. This is being involved in sort of thefts and murders and like all kinds of different criminal issues coming back to Moriarty, which is perhaps another reason why it's been so hard for the police to tie everything back to Moriarty, whereas Holmes sees the bigger picture and
Yeah.
all of these smaller crimes are part of some bigger plan
Mhm.
from the center.
Well, because of this, because there's so many people involved and Moriarty so connected, Holmes has to give special instructions to Watson just to get on the train to meet him. Um, and he has a second first class, he goes, go to the second first class carriage from the front of the train
Yeah.
that we reserved for us. and he has to go through all these. He has to meet a special carriage and take it there and
They
all.
call for the hansom. Don't get in the first hansom. Wait for the second. Like there's a whole rigmarole. Wait in the carriage until exactly the time, or wait until the hansom until exactly what is it, quarter past 9, and then you've got to like book it across to get in the train, the second first class carriage,
Yeah.
and I'll meet you there.
And even the one carriage he takes, the brougham he takes when Watson gets on it, and we'll say this is about, it was a very massive driver wrapped in a dark cloak who rides him. And we'll learn how that is, learn who that is. Holmes will tell him who that is in a minute. But it is when he gets there, finally, Holmes isn't there. And what happens? They put some old Italian priest.
I love this.
Carriage
I love this. Where poor Watson, trying to follow all the directions, finally gets there. This Italian priest won't leave him alone, is like asking like a bunch of questions, trying to like, he's got this horrible broken English, and then he shows up in the carriage, and Watson's like, it's not even worth it for me to try to deal with this right now because Holmes isn't here. The train's leaving in like 10 minutes. My Italian's worse than this guy's English. Where the hell is Holmes? He said the carriage is the rendezvous, and now I've got this old Italian priest on my hands.
And as we've seen in other stories, then Holmes, like, just suddenly Watson hears, "My dear Watson," said a voice, "you have not even condescended to say good morning. I'm astonished. What? It's Holmes." And the way his disguise goes away, he just says, "For an instant, the wrinkles were smoothed away. The nose drew away from the chin. The lower lip ceased to protrude, and the mouth to mumble. The dull eyes regained their fire. The drooping figure expanded." It wasn't even makeup. It was like Holmes made his face into like a little old Italian guy. Like I can't do that clearly, but Holmes did it just through his own expressive features, and he was able to.
It's incredible, right? And then the whole frame collapsed again, and Holmes is gone as quickly as he came. I love that description. It's the sort of like flickering through, the like peering out from behind the disguise, and then immediately collapsing back into it. Yeah, it's incredible.
So it's interesting that Doyle pulls this out, that, like, one of the great things about his Holmes stories is that this disguise, and he fools Watson, and Holmes is great at doing this kind of thing. And so you think that Doyle wants to, like, if this is my last Sherlock story, I'm going to bring out the really good stuff. But one of the things I find fascinating, Mary, is that what he doesn't have is an intricate mystery to survive, to solve. That instead it is an adventure to survive. That the story winds up becoming almost entirely different, even though it's like the format is the same in a sense. Instead of the client, because sometimes we get this, Sherlock comes and explains the case to Watson, and that happens in things, but they're not trying to solve it. They're trying to escape, which makes it a thriller and not a mystery. And
well, we've talked about this, right? About these stories being adventure stories, right? That these are not billed as mysteries, and that these are not the detective. This isn't the detective story as mystery that we've come to expect of the genre. These are still very much adventures. There is a detective in them, and sometimes there's a mystery. There's always a problem, but it's not always a mystery, right? And in this case, the problem to be solved is survive till Monday. Make it through the end. This is the goal. This is the mission. This is the problem. And you're absolutely right. The way that Holmes comes to Watson, it's the almost an inversion, right? Of instead of the client coming to Holmes and laying before him all the things that have happened, and putting all the pieces.
And that's happened a few times that we have had those cases. But in this time, it's never anything to be solved. This is only about surviving Moriarty.
Comes to Watson and said, "This is it. This is what we've got to do. This is the plan. This is the mission going forward."
It does
definitely an
surprise
adventure.
me a little. It does surprise me a little that Doyle didn't try to come up with, like, the craziest, most intricate, like locked room mystery I could ever do kind of thing.
Right.
He's like, no, no,
He's
no.
tired.
Well, and but it's also it's about his characters.
Yes.
And
Yes.
something I think Doyle never understood is that you have created two great characters, and that's
Yes.
why people keep coming back for them.
Yes.
They don't come back they're not coming back for the mysteries. They're not coming back for the plots. They're coming back for these characters. And that's all he gives us in this. So I think he unconsciously understands it, but I don't think he
Yeah.
understands it in the way that like his fellow writers would have been like, "What are you crazy?
Yeah.
Like,
You've done it. You've hit upon the character.
why would you give this up?" But he wants to do other, and Doyle thinks he can do anything. Um, like I'll just continue writing and be, brilliant and rich and create all the things that I want to do. I don't, you know, I mean, if he doesn't bring Sherlock back later, he's never gonna like you've never heard from him again.
Oh no, I mean Professor Challenger, right, was never going to rise to the heights.
Not like this, no.
Despite his best efforts, it was not going to rise to the heights of Holmes and Watson. And I tell people this all the time about the stories. People are like, oh, you read mysteries? You like detective fiction? I'm like, no, I actually really don't like mystery fiction at all, which is such a funny thing to say from somebody who runs a Sherlock Holmes science society. But no, it's the characters. It's all about the
Yeah.
characters. It's all about the character development. It's all about watching these two strangers who become flatmates and then become so incredibly dear to each other and watch the rise and fall of their individual struggles and the friendship and what the relationship goes through. That's what I'm here for. And I think that's what so many people are here for. And certainly this story gives us, this is Watson's closure story,
Yeah,
right?
and he's also given us this, he's only given us the bare bones, and but it somehow is enough to expand into this great supervillain Moriarty, which is like Doyle hardly gives us anything for him, and yet
No.
he is like he's this great supervillain.
Yeah.
And they leave him in the dust of the station. They point out the window like they see him. He comes, runs. The tall man runs through the crowd. He's like, ah,
Yeah. That's so scary. The tall guy in the crowd, like, oh crap, he's actually there, right? Like it's not up until this point there, you could possibly be like, is Holmes making it up?
yeah.
Is he right? Is there this guy following him? Was it just a brick that was falling down? Is he just needs a little sleep? But now we've seen the professor in the crowd.
And they escape, and Holmes laughing.
Yep.
He rose and throws off the costume, and
Have you seen the paper?
they burned our Baker Street. They burned the Baker Street apartments down. No, they're not Watson's because he's married now with a wife. But
Right,
they
but he still said our rooms at Baker Street.
yes, they set fire to our rooms last night. No great harm was done. So they set fire, but it didn't destroy everything. That's good. Um, and
But Doyle's really leaving nothing, right? Like we're ending the home stories. We are taking Baker Street with us. We're torching it. I love like he's done. Like Doyle is scorched earth Sherlock Holmes. Like nothing will remain. They've burned the rooms at Baker Street. Here we are tying up loose ends, right? Doyle pulling out all the stops. We find out who the coachman was, right? Watson didn't recognize his enormous coachman, who turns out to be Brother Mycroft.
Mycroft was the coachman. So Mycroft's involved here too. They like how Sherlock got Mycroft off his, out of his
To
chair.
leave,
So,
right? To leave the Diogenes Club. Like how big a deal does this have to be to get Mycroft to be the man of action? It's a pretty big deal.
it's my third shake for the show, so that's a good drink.
Love it. I was gonna say I take you like the cocktail.
Yeah, I'm having another right there.
I'm always very pleased when they come out well.
Yeah, this worked out really well.
I'm so glad. Somebody in the Facebook group a couple weeks ago had done a batch of the Agra Treasure, and I was like, oh, it's so good to know that people like the cocktails. Like it's great to see them come
They
around
do.
again. I love that. I love when a cocktail you find stuff you like, new things, new drinks. It's
Well,
nice to have a new favorite, but it was
when we
fun.
have you on for the wrap-up show for episode 30, we will definitely devote some time to your mixology and creating all these Sherlock tales. It'll be a lot of fun.
A labor of love, truly.
Well,
Um,
Watson's now wondering what's going on. He says, "What will I do?" And Holmes says, "What I should do." And he's going to engage a special and follow them. And then we have this great kind of battle of wits that, that they're going to like Holmes. Holmes needs to now outthink Moriarty because everything that Holmes can think of, Moriarty will think of. So
right.
who's going to make the variation in thinking that will then kind of win here?
No room for error. You
Yeah.
just have to stay one step ahead if somebody is following your train of thought.
Yeah. Holmes says it would be the ruin of the work of 3 months,
Mhm.
so we have to get him. We can't just have like his organization arrested. We have to get him as well. Um, and Watson hates this because then they have to flee like they're criminals.
Right. And poor Watson loses his baggage along the way.
Yeah, Holmes signs things like, well, we'll get off at a stop that he's not going to expect us to
Get off
get,
of Canterbury, yeah.
give up our luggage and go here, like, and but I almost think of like, yeah, but Moriarty would think that you were going to do that, and but the way he set it up here, but he doesn't. So, but they have to. Watson is annoyed at the idea of being forced to dodge and hide before a man whose record was black with unutterable infamies. So, and of course, before that,
Maybe.
seriously inconvenienced by the loss of my luggage. Um,
Looking rather ruefully after the rapidly disappearing luggage van, which contained my wardrobe.
well, they escape.
Sacrifice is
Hooray! They get to Brussels and then Strasbourg. They're on the continent, and just like a sentence, they're like gone. They've like
yeah.
been
And
through the
it's Monday, and we've made it to Monday.
Yeah, and Holmes finds a reply and then curses with a bitter curse, hurled it into the grate. What was his curse? I would like to know. I might have done it. He has escaped. Moriarty from Watson. Yes, they have secured the whole gang at
That's
the
Watson.
so Moriarty's gang. Now, of course he did, because he followed you. This is the grand thing. Like the in Holmes's thinking, I'm thinking like, well, if you went to Europe and when you knew he was following you, why did you do that if you wanted him to stay in England to be arrested? But there you go. He did. So
You have to wonder if Holmes is like, he says he's willing to sort of die for this case, but you have to wonder if that survival instinct is just kicking in a little bit. Got to get to Europe. I'd rather not be murdered waiting to catch Professor Moriarty.
for a charming week, we wandered up the valley of the Rhone, Watson says. It was a lovely trip. The dainty green of the spring below, the virgin white of the winter above. Take this little, vacation in the Alps at the end here. But of course, Holmes is still on the alert. Watson tells us, his quick glancing
How
eyes,
can you forget?
sharp
Right.
scrutiny of every face that passed us. One time a rock comes tumbling down, and Holmes is like, "Oh, they're still after us." So,
Yeah.
you see
They're
that
like, no, they're
falling
just
rock?
rocks. And he's like,
I know what it is. Come on, rocks fall from the Alps. So it happens. But Holmes knows. I mean, he's been had rocks,
gotta
stone
wonder.
fall from him in London. So, uh,
Is it paranoia if someone actually is out to get you?
yeah, well, so that's that. That's true. Uh, also that Holmes is never depressed. He still has these exuberant
Despite all this.
spirits that he's,
Yeah.
really, he's not depressed thinking about this, and but he's not carefree. He, but
Right.
but he's exuberant, and then And then he gives a little assessment. And this kind of assessment of his career then is also Doyle kind of wrapping up his Sherlock Holmes stories. If my record were closed tonight, I could still survey it with equanimity. The air of London is the sweeter for my presence. In over 1,000 cases, 1,000? There's like a great, like, wow, we've had over 1,000. We need all we get in the end, we get 60 story. We need a
That's it.
thousand. I need to know the rest of these. Um, I am not
Seriously.
aware that I have ever used my powers upon the wrong side. Well, you've broken the law sometimes, but there you go.
Yeah,
But on the right side, because Holmes is not about the law, he's about justice.
justice. Yes.
The
The,
whole
the one that brings equilibrium to society, returns things to where they should be. They're balanced.
Yes. Of late, I have been tempted to look into the problems furnished by nature rather than those superficial ones for which our artificial state of society is responsible. Your memoirs will draw to an end, Watson, upon the day that I crowned my career by the capture or extinction of the most dangerous and capable criminal in Europe. That Holmes is like, all right, this is the end. And you're just going to write about the last case that I ever solved. So,
That's interesting because at this point, I'm realizing, looking back over these past few paragraphs, that even though Holmes has had the conversation with Moriarty, that's like, I'll take you down if it's the last thing I do. The conversation up to this point has been Holmes talking about bringing his career to a close, not his
mhm.
life. Right. That I'm going to be investigating the mysteries of nature, or, this is the crowning achievement of my career. This is the end of the career, as opposed to the end of Holmes himself. That sort
Yeah.
of hasn't been introduced in a real, tangible way yet, or certainly is not sort of hitting Watson, I don't think.
Well, if that's true, though, because this will bear later that if Holmes is saying that, like, oh, yeah, I still have some plans now. I
Yeah.
still now I want to do this stuff. I want to kind of go out and observe nature and do some other things, and I'm fine with leaving this behind me. So he's not being a fatalist at this point.
No.
That moment won't happen until he's faced with that moment. Um,
Right. Right.
that for now he's willing to say that, like, I'm going to go on because I've defeated him, and but he's not willing to give himself up for that yet.
Right.
Well, now Watson lets us know that when you say something like this, I shall be brief and yet exact
Oh,
in the little which remains for me to tell. It is not a subject on which I would willingly dwell, yet I am conscious that a duty devolves upon me to admit no detail. You got to think as a reader that, like, oh, this is it. This is now you're going to give me the bad news.
yeah. It breaks your heart. Poor Watson has to deliver this news, and you can feel the reluctance.
Yeah,
Like, it just, that moment in the text where the text kind of constricts for a minute. It's like, God, I don't want to do this.
yeah.
I really don't want to have to get to this part of the story, but I have to.
Well, they are told, don't miss the Falls of Reichenbach. This is what you need to go see. Um, uh, and um, and Doyle had just visited the Falls of Reichenbach. It's an odd thing
Mm.
about the development of this tale that he has written, that this seems to have taken him several months. Like he seems to have at least had the kernel of it and knew that he was kind of going to end Holmes and it was going to be Moriarty and this kind of thing. But then later in 93 is actually 1893 is when Doyle actually goes to Reichenbach, and he goes on a trip with a few other people, including E.F. Benson, the great ghost story writer. Um, and so he's probably started this story and then finished it later after Reichenbach when he realizes, oh my, this is it. This is the place that I want to bring my character to and have this, grand scene there. Um, I should
Well, it gives a
mention
beautiful,
what's that?
It gives a beautiful description, but you should mention what
He
you
does,
were
and
going to
I'm
mention.
going to have you read that description in a second. Mark Jones and Paul Chapman, who are going to join us for Hounds of the Baskerville, have a great podcast called Doings of Doyle, and in their they have an episode on the final problem, which I'm going to put a link of in the live chat now, which is absolutely fabulous. And they talk about one of the things they talk about, because they're very focused on Doyle's biography, and that is they talk about Doyle going there and things that he might have thought. And it's a great episode, and you can do that. I don't want to repeat what they have talked about in that episode, but that's a great episode to accompany ours, that you
Yeah.
could listen to.
As a preview for their appearance on the
There you go.
Count of the Baskervilles.
We also there's the crook. They have a great episode on the Crooked Man that I recommended when we covered that story as well. They the description that Watson gives of the falls, though, is just brilliant. Why don't you read that? It is indeed a fearful place.
Stunning. It's stunning. It is indeed a fearful place. The torrent, swollen by the melting snow, plunges into a tremendous abyss, from which the spray rolls up like the smoke from a burning house. The shaft into which the river hurls itself is an immense chasm, lined by glistening, cold black rock, and narrowing into a creaming, boiling pit of incalculable depth, which brims over and shoots the stream onward over its jagged lip. The long sweep of green water roaring forever down, and the thick, flickering curtain of spray hissing forever upward, turn a man giddy with their constant whirl and clamor. We stood near the edge, peering down at the gleam of the breaking water far below us against the black rocks, and listening to the half-human shout which came booming up with the spray out of the abyss.
Yeah, what a brilliant, description. And ominous, as it's going to,
So gothic, even.
And have you been there to Reichenbach? I have not. Have you been there?
Have not. I have
Many
not. It's on my
Sherlockians,
Sherlockian bucket list.
many Sherlockians have gone there. It is real. The Reichenbach Falls, you can go, and there's a plaque there now about Holmes meeting Moriarty there. There's a plaque there that you can go and see too, and they're but it's just but it's just great writing from Doyle, but it's also a reminder, like, he saw it, like he went and watched it, and then was able to write this brilliant description of it, and then turn it into this ominous, the listening to the half-human shout which came booming up
so
with
creepy.
spray out of the abyss, like he's not
Very
talking
E.M.
echo.
Forrester.
It's talking about an echo. It's not like that's what it sounds like, some half-human shout as the water hits the bottom. Well, fun stuff. And then Watson and Holmes are going to go there, and they go down. There's only there's only one path on that last part, so you have to like go on the path, to or from. And while they're there, suddenly a Swiss lad comes running, with a letter in his hand. And he tells him that an English lady had arrived in the last stage of consumption at the last inn they were staying in. She absolutely refused to see a Swiss physician because she's an English lady. Of course not. You can't speak my language. I need an English physician. So
proper English doctor.
The appeal was one which not could be ignored. It was impossible to refuse the request of a fellow countrywoman dying in a strange land, and Watson has to go help her. What's fascinating here is the biographical connection with Doyle too, in that now there's debate about when Doyle knew his wife had tuberculosis consumption, that she seemed to be diagnosed maybe later, but Doyle, as a medical doctor, would have been recognizing the symptoms, and he seems to have known the symptoms perhaps before they left. I think he did. I think that's actually in his journal that he knows that Tui is ill, but whether he knew it was consumption or not, that doesn't say that in his journal. it's interesting that and I think probably unconsciously Doyle is wrapping this up in his mind. Like part of the trip he has taken to Switzerland is to bring his wife into, kind of more congenial, environment that she could breathe
Right.
easy.
Better
Um,
weather. Yeah.
yeah. So, uh, and so part of the reason why they're vacationing is for her health. And then just kind of then it becomes a reason for this in the story that Watson has to run off and see an English woman suffering from this disease, which Doyle's wife was also suffering from. As I turned away, I saw Holmes with his back against a rock and with his arms folded, gazing down at the rush of waters. It was the last that I was ever destined to see of him in this world. Um, just, yeah, that's brutal. And here is the picture in the text from Paget, who really does a great job with the falls here, and Holmes standing there alone. Like, this is the last shot we get that Watson
Yeah.
sees of Holmes. So it's perspective, Watson, turning around and looking at his friend here, standing all alone next to the falls. There's his walking stick here.
Dwarfed by them, right? He's so tiny
Yeah.
against that immense waterfall.
And Paget does it in clothes that he thought Holmes would be wearing on this trip. He doesn't throw the deerstalker on him or the tweeds that he would have in the English countryside. It's Holmes on vacation, tramping through the Alps. So it's this kind of
Like
lighter,
his alpine stick.
yeah, with his alpine stick. Um, but the way he's done the falls here are wonderful. Um,
Gorgeous.
this is the Reichenbach, and this is the last time that Watson saw Holmes. Well, at least for this episode. Um,
As he at the time of writing, it was true. Because we
well,
know that Watson's capable of being disingenuous, right? He's got to be fooled along with
at
us
this
because he
time,
can't make
yeah,
it.
this is it. And then uh, he also then he goes to leave and he says as he was walking away, I could see the curving path which winds over the shoulder of the hill and leads to it. Along this, a man was, I remember, walking very rapidly. I could see his black figure clearly outlined against the green behind him. I noted him and the energy with which he walked, but he passed from my mind again as I hurried on upon my errand. Now, because Watson is so focused on, I have to go help this woman who has,
Yeah.
who is sick. He doesn't think that, like, duh, there's Moriarty. Like
Right.
he,
This guy is walking very fast down this one path towards my friend who everyone has been trying to kill lately.
who's been
Watson, man of
reminding me
honor.
over and over that, like, he's still after us. He's still
But
after us.
they're trying to kill me. Yeah, exactly.
So Watson
Poor
doesn't
Watson.
put it together. Well,
Nope.
he gets back to the hotel and they're like, no, are you crazy? There's nobody here. And it's like, oh, that tall.
I love that moment though, when Watson gets to the hotel. Like, I love that moment of him just starting the conversation with the innkeeper that's like, well, I trust she's no worse. And as soon as the guy looks surprised, Watson is like, oh, the sinking feeling, the knowing immediately at the first quiver of his eyebrows, his heart turning to lead, and knowing before the guy can even finish talking, oh, but before that tall gentleman, the English gentleman, and Watson's just gone
Yep.
because he knows immediately.
In a tingle of fear, I was already running down the village street. Just tries to, like, oh no, I can't believe I've done this. And putting it together in his head, like, of course, that was Moriarty, which he doesn't say right here, but
Right.
runs back and he finds himself at the fall of Reichenbach once more. But it's like 2 hours. It's like it was an hour back, and now it's 2 hours now. And Holmes's alpine stock still leaning against the rock by which I had left him, but there was no sign of him. It was in vain that I shouted. The only answer was my own voice, reverberating in the rolling echo from the cliffs around me. And also maybe that half human supernatural shout coming up from the bottom of the abyss. And he emphasizes it here. He had remained on that free 3-foot path with sheer wall on one side and sheer drop upon the other until his enemy had overtaken him. So this is like clearly what must have happened. Watson imagines. I was dazed with the horror of the thing. I began to think of Holmes's own methods and to try to practice them in reading this tragedy, and which he does. He then I must, do what Holmes would do. So I'll follow the footsteps. And he does, and discovers the footprints lead to the edge of the abyss. And then there's like brambles and ferns are torn and bedraggled. And that's where.
And nothing coming back.
Yeah. So because, and I think he must assume, although he doesn't say so specifically, that if one of them had survived, he would have encountered them coming back.
Right.
So
right. And the footprints, right? That there are 2 lines of footmarks leading in one direction and none leading back.
There were none returning. So I lay upon my face and peered over with the spray spouting up all around me. It had darkened since I left, and now I could only see here and there the glistening of moisture upon the black walls, and far away down at the end of the shaft, the gleam of the broken water. I shouted, but only that same half-human cry of the fall was borne back to my ears. So I like the repetition that Doyle is putting in this to kind of describe this scene. It is now it's a matter of telling us what he finds and what has happened. And he says the silver cigarette case. I love this because if you were now doing a Sherlock Holmes thing and you wanted to leave the last vestige of him, of course people would leave a pipe. There would be
leave the pipe.
I found Sherlock's pipe.
Right.
It's a silver cigarette case. Of course, everybody smokes cigarettes, especially Sherlock. And he was smoking them earlier in this story. I'm not saying you guys should smoke cigarettes. I'm just saying Sherlock smoked cigarettes and they were very soothing to him and he enjoyed them. So, yeah, I just want to smoke a cigarette during one of these shows.
I know. This is just your mission.
I'm reading about it. So, but also he pulls the cigarette case up and a small square of paper fluttered to the ground. What if it went over? It would have been like,
I know. The stress of that moment, right?
It was over the edge. And it is a note from Sherlock that begins, "My dear Watson, I write these few lines through the courtesy of Mr. Moriarty, who awaits my convenience for the final discussion of those questions which lie between us." What a great
incredible.
It's also that kind of, English gentleman foes. We're gonna like prescribe some rules here, and then we're going to, make sure we
then what? We're gonna duke it out, right? But let me write to my friend.
Cool. Yeah. Wait, let me write a oh, certainly, sir. Please write your note.
Of course.
And he does that.
Wild.
And then, Moriarty has been giving me a sketch of the methods by which he avoided the English police. Let me tell you, Mr. Holmes, how I escaped and made it to you. I mean, this whole little story within here and how they react toward and how they relate towards each other. I am pleased to think that Holmes says, I am pleased to think that I shall be able to free society from any further effects of his presence, though I fear that it is at a cost which will give pain to my friends, and especially, my dear Watson, to you. This is now Holmes realizing that, all right,
this is it.
Yeah. I can get rid of this guy, but this is the only certain way of getting rid of this guy, that I have to die too. And that's the most assured way of getting rid of Moriarty. But I love that he mentions that it's going to give pain to especially
Yes.
my dear Watson, to you.
It's one of the things that a lot of the adaptations miss or overstate, right?
Yeah.
That Holmes is so invested in the problem and so tunnel vision, that he only sees the one outcome. But this is a moment of him looking back and understanding what his friendship to Watson means, and
Mhm.
knowing how painful. By the time Watson gets this note, how heartbroken he will be when
Yeah.
he gets to these lines. This is one of the adaptations that I think does this whole thing very well. Still, is the Jeremy Brett
Yeah.
Granada, uh,
Yeah.
from the late '80s. Really, this episode and the following are phenomenal in terms of the emotion of this
When you watch
scene.
the Brett, when you feel like you're watching the death of Sherlock Holmes and nothing
Yes,
else. That's all it
yes,
is. And I
absolutely.
know part of that is in there for the BBC Sherlock with Cumberbatch, but it is such a twist on it that it winds up being it's absolutely not what Doyle was doing. That but I won't give away anything to say that, but it is an adaptation in a way that it is something different. I think it's effective, but it is something different.
It is, but it's something, right? It's the story, as it's the final problem read from the other side,
Yeah.
as opposed to being on the other side, being on the empty house and on the other side of the stories, as opposed to the finality of this.
I can't give it away without saying it, but well, let me just say that like Sherlock the fatalist knows he's going to die in this story,
Yeah,
and we're not a Jeremy Brett.
yeah.
That's not the case in the other. That's all I'll say.
They also, one of the things that I love about the Granada series, since we're on it, is they have the sketch of the Reichenbach Falls over their mantelpiece at
Hmm.
Baker Street. And that is it's just such a
Yeah,
chilling detail to
yeah,
note when you're a
always
Sherlockian and
there.
you
Yeah,
see that. I
yeah.
remember seeing it for the first time and be like, are they what? They have what over the fireplace? Incredible, but brings a whole other layer to it. Really haunting layer
Yeah.
to watching the series.
Yeah, it's this warning, it's this omen that
Yeah,
happens in the series. Um,
that only makes sense in retrospect. But yeah, it's wonderful. I can't say enough beautiful things about that.
he also says in this letter, he says, "My career had in any case reached its crisis, and that no possible conclusion to it could be more congenial to me than this." Now, both of those words, crisis and congenial, we don't use in the same way anymore. Like crisis, this kind of, and it's originally just like a state of the OED says a state of affairs in which a decisive change for better or worse is imminent. We don't do the for
Yes,
better anymore. It's just the worse that we do now. Crisis means, oh no,
right,
things are bad
right,
happening and we've got to fix them. That's a crisis. Um, and the
right.
congenial, the kind of thing that like it'll give, with, geniality. It'll be like it'll end in happiness kind of thing
Pleasant. Yeah, exactly.
is what Holmes is saying, that like, oh, of course this will happen. And we wouldn't use congenial in, I'm going to go kill myself with him. I'm going to go die with him, willingly die
Yeah,
with him. Not really kill myself, and
willingly.
willingly
Yeah.
die with him. We wouldn't use congenial in
Yeah.
that sense anymore. Um, but
No.
this is the language that Sherlock uses. He says, and then he lets Watson know that, like, I knew that was a hoax. Of course, that there wasn't somebody back there for you. So, literally, as soon as he got that letter, Holmes knew that, like, all right, this is it. Like, I've got to finish this. And it's just heartbreaking to think that he let Watson walk away. That
He
without
watched Watson walk away and do that one little like
leaned
Morpheus
leaned
look
on the
back.
cliff and just,
Yeah.
stayed. Yeah.
Have to play it cool, act like he doesn't know that this is it. And it's heartbreaking.
And the finish of the letter is, tell Inspector Patterson that, the papers are there, the pigeonhole M, in a blue envelope, that he'll know that this is what he needs. And my prop and I already talked to Mycroft about my property. So Holmes knew that it could happen, of course. That doesn't mean he was being a fatalist and going and knowing I'm going to die. But of course he wrapped
Right.
up his affairs because that's what any smart person would do. And then pray, give my greetings to Mrs. Watson.
Ugh.
Um,
Ugh.
you know, so that's kind of unusual that, like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's a little shot, I
Um,
think.
Mrs. Hudson doesn't give a shout out here. So he doesn't say hey to
Poor
Mrs.
Mrs. Hudson. She's just had her property burned too. Poor thing.
Give my greetings to your wife and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes. Is how he ends it with Watson. This, it's formal and yet
Yeah,
like revealing in its attachment to him as
yes.
as a friend. Um,
The commas hurt me so much. The way this is punctuated. Like this is the
uh,
nerdy English teacher in me. The commas are devastating.
oh yes, but
Give
and
him to
actors
Watson.
love it. You got to know that when
Oh,
Jeremy Brett got to do this, he was like, "Oh, I don't,
this is
the
amazing.
commas tell me exactly how to do it."
Absolutely. It's clearly in the text. Brett walking around with this edition, being like, it says in the text right here on set. Yeah, the commas are brutal.
Yeah,
Those pauses, those heavy, like not wanting it to be the last thing you say, not wanting it to be the last thing, and just that stretching out of believe me to be my very dear, very sincere.
it's almost Shakespearean in that, I mean, while Shakespeare will rely on rhythm and
Yeah,
and the meter to tell actors what
yeah.
to do, Doyle now by the late 19th century and the way grammar is developed and punctuation is developed,
Mhm.
he's relying on punctuation for all of his pauses, and this is what gives the actor or the reader the emphasis.
Yeah.
And, pray give my greetings to Mrs. Watson and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock
Just
Holmes.
these
I mean,
endless little
yeah,
phrases, these endless little
you can't rush
phrases.
through it. I mean, you can rush through it, but you're going to miss what he's saying if you rush through it. The commas tell
It's
you to
too much.
pause.
Yeah, the walking up to the edge and then the walking up and then the walking up until
Yeah,
there's no more. I almost see this in my head as him getting to the bottom of the little piece of paper. And he has no more to say because there's no more room.
yeah,
That he's trying to get in as much as he can, and this is it.
yeah. I like that.
Neat little hand. That's how I imagine it in my head. And of course, if you've seen Doyle's handwriting, which is ridiculously neat in those manuscripts,
Oh,
I mean, I'm sure they're fair copies. I'm sure they're
see
not
it
the
on the
original
next
drafts,
episode.
but
No,
they're
no, no,
so,
no, no, no. He wrote that way on his copies and then
what an
later
absolute loon.
corrected. But his first drafts were frequently, not
Oh
always,
my,
but frequently his first drafts were very smooth. And even when you find manuscripts of his that have lots of marks in them, it's still there's
yeah,
like a
yeah.
pretty neat flow of lines that go
Yes,
on. Yeah.
that's true. Blanche Soldier, when he's crossed things out, it's just like, well, it's like very noticeable because he's so meticulous. But I didn't realize those were, though, I just assumed that there must have been drafts that were messy, but he was just like that, huh?
And they could have been some drafts, but but we're not
No.
we're not really thinking that because well, I'll talk about this with Steve Rothman next week. But from
Right, right.
perspective, we think that when he wrote Sherlock Holmes stories, he sat and wrote them and didn't
Yeah.
need to rush through them and knew what he was writing. He could do them very succinctly off the top of his head in just a matter of a few weeks. Well, Watson gives us a final assessment here of what must have happened, by looking at, and then people come and the experts came, I guess the police come and they're and then he sees they're reeling over, locked in each other's arms, that he would have seen. And then I can't imagine that every reader of this issue in the Strand was not then like going right back to the original image
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
starts the story, which is here's the
That one.
share, which is right here. So this
Mhm.
is what the story began with, and this is what it ends with, and this is what everybody's going back to see. Like this is now what Watson is describing. There they are locked in each other's arms, and Moriarty with that arm reaching up, like, oh no, like you got me. Because Holmes has got him in, I don't know, it's not quite a sleeper hold. Well, it's not, I mean, it's not quite an actual wrestling hold. It's good, but he's got the leverage. You can see the leverage. You
Yeah,
can
he's
see
not going anywhere.
Moriarty's bent. Holmes's right knee is up
Yeah.
above Moriarty's. It's on his thigh there, and it's like you're going down and I'm going down. And because Moriarty, when he comes to fight Holmes here, Moriarty himself would not think, oh no, I'll take Holmes over with me. No, no, he's the
Right.
opposite. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the final flaw in Moriarty. He doesn't realize that Holmes is willing, like, I'll just take you over then. So you're gonna fight. Oh, we'll just both just die. You can't fight, you can't beat somebody who's willing to say, I'll just take us both over.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and and that's the end of them. Watson says there's no bodies. Recovering the bodies was absolutely hopeless in that dreadful cauldron of swirling water and seething foam. They will lie for all time the most dangerous criminal and the foremost champion of the law of their generation. Which he isn't. He's the
So
foremost
poetic.
champion of justice, not the law. Holmes doesn't
Justice.
care about the
Yeah. The
law.
law.
Uh,
Yeah, the law.
they and it's good for us. Hey, there's no bodies. So what does that mean? Um,
Right? Exactly.
but
Exactly.
that's later thinking. Now, do you think
Mhm.
that Doyle was giving himself an out by having no body?
This is funny. I think you and I disagree on this because I really think Doyle wants so badly for this to just be it. Like, he's just like, he's done. I don't think he's planned a way back for himself. I think the whole absurdity of two guys going off the edge of a cliff, like, and no footprints is kind of like, this is as definitive as I can make it. I can't, I'm a Victorian gentleman and I can't like show you grotesquely mangled, shot up bodies just so you can see with your eyes that they're dead. But I can give you the next best thing, which is putting them in an unsurvivable situation.
No, I agree. We don't disagree at all. I totally think that that is the case. Like Doyle was like, "You're dead."
He's not coming back from
Um,
this. Like, this is impossible. He cannot come back
come
from
back
this.
from this. So people do this with the end of Dracula, by Bram Stoker. It's like, oh yeah, then he crumbles into dust, and people are like, oh, but no, like like of course he's dead.
Dust, man.
He was like the author was like, look, he's dead. Like there's nothing.
Exactly.
And but what we're so influenced, well, by Sherlock Holmes and what will happen later, but also by other, especially movies that kind of resurrect, figures again and again. Uh,
Yes.
and
Yes.
but the we'll talk about more of that when we get to the empty house in the next episode. Um, the but the final idea that Doyle thought this was the end has to be in his journal, the Norwood Notebook, which I'll share right now. This is
Oh
1893, and it's just got a bunch of much. He's just
my
jotting
God.
down some things that'll happen. Here's a lecture in Switzerland. Tui ill that he knows since September that she's ill. Um, I can't remember. I can't forget what this is. A lecture
Lectures.
somewhere in Europe.
England?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Lecture in England. Lecture in England. To Davos. They're going to Switzerland,
Oh,
Davos, and then at the end here in December, killed Holmes.
period.
So, period. Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
Killed Holmes. Here, took the time to dot the end there. Period. That's the
And I
end.
think he wrote to the mum too, right? That he killed Holmes and he was so pleased with himself.
Yes. His mother was not. Doyle
No.
Doyle's mother did not love that he killed. She was always the don't kill him, and because he told her he was going to kill him in the first series. She's like, no, 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 don't kill him, you know, and he doesn't. And then by the second series now, which we're at the end of, he's like, no, this is it. I can't, I can't go on anymore. This Holmes has taken over my
Right,
life. Like he is in
right, right.
1893
That's what-
the majority of works has published, more than half, almost like 60-70% of the works he has published have been Sherlock Holmes stories. I need to move on. I need to be Walter Scott and write historical fiction and be acclaimed as
Because
the
we
great
need another Walter
historical
Scott.
romanticist of my time. Or Robert Louis Stevenson. These are the
Yeah.
idols that Doyle has
No,
that
it's true.
to be like. And they don't write detective stories in monthly magazines. So he needs to move on. And it's always a bit of a heart pull that Doyle doesn't realize how great he was at this particular thing. He can be great at many other things, but this he's also great at, and he doesn't recognize it, that we all do.
Silly, silly man.
Well, any closing thoughts on the death of Sherlock Holmes? Because when readers finish this, Mary, right? Like when readers finish, they were
This is
like,
it.
he's dead. That's it. Now,
He's
what,
dead.
what am I going to read now? Um,
Yeah.
you know, there's stories about like people wearing black armbands and, but
Right,
they're
right.
kind of legends. I don't think that necessarily happened.
Apocryphal.
The
Yeah,
losing like 20,000 or 30,000 or 40,000, subscriptions. I don't think that really happens, but
probably not.
people must have been visibly upset. And I mean, the character is, I mean, it's a character people care about.
They
And
must have asked him all the time
we have
for
seen this,
years.
we have seen this example in any number of, movies or TV shows that come to an end, that people are affected by this stuff. And when Watson
Yeah.
ends the story, you know, I shall ever regard as the best and wisest man whom I have ever known. Um, the story ends on the sentimental note of this character, Sherlock Holmes. And Doyle recognizes it. I mean, he ends the story that way, that he knows that this is the way to, like, even if I'm going to be a cynical, reader, I'm thinking like,
Yeah,
yeah, he's only pulling the heartstrings here. But he is. And he gets
but
that.
he gets it. Yeah.
This is what is emotional. This is how we will connect with this character at the end of the story, that we have lost the best and wisest man whom I've ever known. Um, Doyle knows it, and it had to be such a punch. But when you originally, did you always know? Can you remember the first time you read Final Problem?
I I do remember the first time I read so it was this edition because this is the edition that I read all my Sherlock in for the first time because this is the one I stole from my dad. I hope he's not watching this. I don't think he knows that I stole this years ago. Um, and the way that the book is set up is, look, obviously there's so much more that comes after, right?
Yeah.
That this is where the story ends. But we end with Watson doing a little bit of that Phantom of the Opera, Meg Giry
Oh, yeah.
opening
I didn't
whole
share that. I
Phantom's
meant to.
Mask at the end kind of deal. And then there's this blankness.
Hmm.
And then there's just more. And this was probably done for practical reasons. but then it's the Hound of the Baskervilles, right? And we know that the Hound of the Baskervilles was written years after.
Which we'll
And
get to. We don't need to go into like
yeah,
those parts again,
right,
but
we won't.
you had a pause.
But
And
right, but it's a pause, and it's like, well, he's not back. He's not alive. So I, on some level, of course, knew that Holmes was coming back. He had to have. But there is that moment like fake out where it's like, oh, but maybe they are just going to be retrospectives. Maybe this is how he dies, and all the rest of them are just Watson remembering him. That would be weird, but maybe it's a thing.
yeah.
So I definitely had the moment of hesitation, even though the format of the text sort of hints at this return.
We'll talk about these things in the very last wrap-up episode too. So I know Anastasia believed that, like, oh, he's dead. Okay. And then you go on. One of our other co-hosts. So yeah, and it's people were, and it was many years before they
Yeah,
got Sherlock.
it
So
was.
this was a definitive moment for people, for readers in 1893.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone really long tonight, and thank you all, but I didn't want to cut short the final problem.
Yes.
We
No,
had
I
to,
appreciate it. Thank you for
we
dealing
had
with the
to,
tech issues.
yeah, your tech issues didn't make the show long. We needed to
We would
talk.
have done this anyway.
We needed to talk about all this stuff. So I thank you all for hanging on this long for this story, which I didn't want to leave anything out of it. Thank you, Sherlockians, for joining us for episode 28 of Sherlock Mondays. Mary, you will return for our final wrap-up show, episode 30.
I will.
On our next show, episode 29, Monica Schmidt returns to talk about the return of Sherlock Holmes and the adventure of the empty house. Reminder, everyone, that the Rosenbach holds the manuscript for this story, and we'll share images on the next show. We'll also have a special guest, Steve Rothman, editor emeritus of the Baker Street Journal and author of and one of the editors of the BSI facsimile edition of the manuscript for Empty House. So that'll be our next episode. We will also reveal on the next episode the next books that we are covering for the now I just gave it away. Books.
You did. I wasn't going to say
Plural.
it.
Hey, I just did. Plural for the next Biblioventure series. Well, that's even better because now like people are like,
What?
it's more than one. What are we doing? That'll be for the fall Biblioventure. We'll reveal what that is, what our subject will be in the next episode. Thank you to our chat, Mrs. Hudson, Brianna, for managing the live chat links as always. Thank you to the sponsor of this program, Sherlock Mondays, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You can also become a member. Membership gives you early access, discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Do not forget to sign up for the Hound of the Baskerville show. If you have already not done so, that'll start in a few weeks. It'll be all the Mondays in May of June 2024, and that's the only way you can watch it. We have no plans to release this show for free. This is a subscription only show that we're really hoping will help fund shows like this that we do for the future. So let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. If you're listening to the podcast, leave us a review somewhere. Mary, thank you. Long night.
I appreciate it.
I'll see you soon, Mary. Bye-bye, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.